So when we run the report, we come up with, so the yellow is those under agreement, and so that could be legacy under agreement or anything that's been directly issued by ARIN. And the gray is those that are not under agreement, which would be legacy that's not under an agreement with ARIN. So as you can see, orgs with name and address, we're at 100% of for those that are under an agreement, 96.9% for those not under an agreement. POCs with emails, again, 100% on those under agreement, 82% not under. And both orgs and POCs, 100% for those under agreement, 80% for those not under an agreement. So for the correctness of everything, the metrics, a required registration data listed for organization to hold internet number resources has to match official sources. So in the ARIN database, that means they must have been vetted. They must be marked as vetted, which means that we have gone through the process of looking at Secretary of State websites, all different kinds of things tools we have that we look at to make sure that a company is actually vets, is actually real. And the required, of course, we use the validation of the POC data to make sure that that is correct. And again, that is a local measurement that is performed by ARIN because, of course, the other RIRs don't necessarily have those same metrics to test. They don't have a vetted field possibly, or they don't have a validated field for POCs. But we do, and that's what we use. So the stats on that, for the number of correct vetted organizations for those under contract is 86%. For those not under agreement, it's 10.5%. For validated POCs, under contract, 80%. Not under contract, 20.9%. And then they have both the org's been vetted and the POC's been validated. Under agreement, 70%. Not under agreement, 7%. Moving on to current. So current is just, it's saying, hey, when's the last time you checked to make sure that these companies were vetted, are still vetted, or that the POCs were validated? For both, we used the a 5-year requirement, although for validated, it's 1 year because POCs have to validate every year per policy. And that local measurement is performed, again, by ARIN. And when we go into the currentness of our data in the ARIN database, orgs that have been vetted within the last 5 years, 58.7% under contract, 5% not under contract. POCs validated within the last 5 years, 98.1% under contract, 32% not under contract. And both orgs and POCs, 58.5% under contract, 4.7% not under contract. So these numbers pretty much show that for the resources that are under contract with ARIN, the correctness of the data is much better than those that are not under contract. So we're hoping to do things that will allow us to increase those percentages a lot. Just remember on the current where it's like it's been vetted in the last 5 years, 58.7% have been vetted. That doesn't mean that those are correct. You have to go back to the correctness to see which ones were vetted in the first place and were good. So it's a stepping stone. You got the comprehensiveness, that there's actually data there, then the correctness, that it was actually at one time correct, and then the currentness that shows you how current that information is. So it gives you more of a feeling of whether you can trust that data or not. So that kind of sums it up. We'll be given this report. It probably will end up in the NRO statistics that the presentation I gave at the start of this meeting yesterday. These statistics will probably show up there for all the RIRs once we have this complete set of data, which will probably be at the next ARIN meeting.
John?
Yes, John.
I'd like to answer the question at the mic. So, Rudiger, these metrics do not include any measurement of the overlap or intersection or gap between the 5 RIRs. So a gap in where a number resource is or a mismatch is not included in these measurements. This is something I intend to take to the other RIRs to discuss, and ICANN to see if we can get measurements of such, because we know those occur on occasion. Oh, did you have a question?
Well, kind of the question, well, okay. I'm looking forward to hear in the NRO activity reports what you are actually doing there. For John's presentation, I'm looking into that direction, but John's presentation kind of has a hook where I want to hang on. You were saying and starting that the investigation for the quality started or included an analysis of the consistency of extended delegated with the RIR data. I wonder whether that is something that happened as a one-shot thing, and in early May things looked nice, and the fact that the way the maintenance of the common delegated extended of the NRO is patched together in a way so that later in May the ARIN ASs all disappeared, or other things that probably are happening. That incident was by far not the first where people could see inconsistencies and problems, and it certainly was not the last. Is the quality thing and the consistency check something that will be established as a continuing activity, or was this just a one-shot?
So as noted, you're talking about the extended stats produced by the NRO. That's not actually what these measure. These only measure the data in the ARIN database.
John started talking about consistency between the RIR data, like ARIN, and all the specifics of the ARIN data obviously are private to the ARIN considerations, but he started quite correctly, I think, with saying, well, okay, the consistency between the NRO joint delegated extended with the RIR data has been analyzed.
So right now, the scope of these statistics do not include metrics that would address your question, because each RIR will produce consistency measurements on its own and currency measurements on its own, and the union of those will be reported. I'm going to bring to the NRO this issue to discuss, but as I kind of noted both during and before your question, the scope of these don't cover the issue you have.
Yeah. Rudiger, the first stats that the comprehensive is broken into 2 parts, and I only showed stats on the second part, which is germane only to the ARIN database. I didn't report on the global numbers of the extended stats.
Yeah, kind of understood. John, let me point back to yesterday. You were somewhere making a statement about, yes, in fact, we should consider there is one registry. I laud that approach and view very much, but we are just seeing and pointing to gaps in that vision.
Well aware of that. Recognize that the current Internet Registry, I use that term, 2 letters, Internet Registry, which is the term that's been used for it since, I don't know, 1991, does not consist of a single database or a single union database that has one entry for every unique range. It consists of many registries which, if you hold up, every address block should be in one, and all the others should have pointers to that one. That is not the current state, but it is certainly what it should be. Andrew?
Excuse me.
Oh.
Just a question. Betty Foster from Guadeloupe, French Caribbean. I wanted to know, you're talking about checking address, database, and many things for all POC. And I would like to know how you introduce the consent of people from French Caribbean, or what is the impact of GDPR of all stuff you're checking?
I'm not either. Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, I would know exactly what is the impact of GDPR of what the work you do about checking all the data you have.
Right now, this data isn't broken down by
GDPR.
segments.
I'm going to explain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Sorry, so the question was, how does GDPR apply to the checking that is done with this data? I think was the was the question.
This is data that's contained within the ARIN database that there's a report runs through those data fields just to check the data in those fields, and none of that data is reported, only the stats. We don't know, we don't have any idea. We don't get a report that shows what was in those fields. We just get a report of whether those fields, if it said validate, if they're a POC, and it's got a check for validated, that's what we're checking. If it's an org and it says vetted, that's what we're checking, that field that says vetted. For the comprehensive, for there's something there, we just check to make sure there's something there. It could be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and there's something there in that field. So I'm not really sure how it ties to GDPR. Kevin?
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. I'm assuming this is baseline for the next and next and next. Do you have a frequency, is the first question, of when you plan to run these reports? I don't know how much work went into it, how automated it is, but how often do you plan to run this?
Thanks to our great engineering team, I can run it like anytime I want to run it, but we're gonna actually capture it and keep it for comparison data monthly.
Thank you.
When we do all our other stats.
And the level of information was very useful. Obviously, as more data over time comes up and we can see the percentages going up in that accuracy, that would be wonderful. But there's one thing that is missing from this, and that is the correlation of size of blocks from an impact perspective, i.e., 5% of something was invalid is not really relevant if you don't know that that is 100 /24s of IPv4 space. It's not that important. But if that 5% happen to encompass 1 million /24s, then that is a far more important piece of information. So if there's any way to have that correlation of 5% equals, you know, this amount of the registered space or whatever the case may be, that would at least allow for some better understanding of this data.
Correct, very interesting. And of course, that happens with everything. Every time we use percentages, as in the transfers, when we do the number of transfers, and then we do the total number of addresses, there's no correlation there. Lots of times there could be somebody does a lot of transfers and very little addresses are moved. Somebody does 2 transfers and a lot of addresses.
Exactly, and same sort of.
That is something we discussed internally in my shop, and it's something we want to do, but these were requirements that we were asked to meet by the NRO, and the whole RIR registration services managers got together, and this was the low-hanging fruit to actually start and get a report that we could put out to the community, and that's what we're looking for now, input from the community. And ARIN, we can go off and do things on our own and report on our own outside of this report. These are the things we have to report for the NRO report, though.
Thank you.
Andrew Dole, on slide 8, if you could go back, the first column, I believe, has a number that's like 84%, 86%. What does vetted mean in this context? What is the 14% of orgs not doing? Or what is missing for those 14%?
So those 14% could be organizations from before the time that we actually had that ability to mark them as vetted. So early, maybe like in 2000, 2001. I'm not sure, Lisa, if you know when we first actually started vetting orgs and actually marking them as vetted. But it could also be orgs that have come in and asked for resources or something, and we've looked and we have tried to vet them and they don't vet, so we remove their vetted status.
So there could be orgs with no resources attached in that column?
No, there's orgs that have resources that are no longer orgs. Organizations that are registered legally registered in a state that we can find, and they haven't come to us for any action, so we can't force them to do an M&A transfer if they've changed. It could be M&As that have happened and we know they've happened and that organization has gone away, so they no longer vet, but this organization that acquired them has not done the transfer yet. There's several reasons, Andrew.
What does vetted mean?
Vetted means that we have gone out and we have checked, like I said, the Secretary of State websites, which is our most common way of vetting, and we go in there and we look for that organization and we find it, it's registered, it'll say it's in good standing, it's paid its taxes, it was registered in 2001, and it's still valid, and it's still.
So a non-vetted org is one where there's a name.
We
in the
cannot
field, but
find.
it doesn't match a recorded.
Right, we cannot find them anywhere. And it could be that they changed states and they never came and told us that they changed states, so we're looking at one state, they're actually incorporated in another state. When we do that, if we go in and look and we find they don't vet, we remove that vet checklist from that organization until they come back to us again. Realizing we only have any kind of power, or I hate to use the word power, but we can only ask them to do M&A transfers when they're trying to do something else, and we can say, well, you can't do that until you actually update your records and get the right organization in there.
Folks, I'm closing the microphones, so if you have an urgent need to speak to this, go to the mics now. Otherwise, the last two speakers are the last two speakers.
Carrie?
So I see that it would be easy to figure it out or to vet companies that are based in Canada and the US. But how would you deal with some of the other people in the Caribbean or businesses in the Caribbean? How would you deal with that, vetting those?
So I'm going to take a stab at that, and then I'm going to ask Lisa to keep me honest here. I believe for the most part, we will request that the documentation be sent to us from the organization to show their papers in good standing, and we will usually accept that. And I know you cringe, and I know we cringe, but for some of the, even in some of the states, it's very, very difficult. Lisa, do you want to get up and talk to that, or did I cover it pretty well?
Okay.
So,
Thanks.
sometimes you have to trust, and it goes into depending, Carrie, on the actual transaction that they're attempting. If somebody's attempting to claim a /16 and transfer it to somebody, we're going to need more than just them sending us something saying that that's who they are. So we have other ways of doing things. Owen?
So we focused a lot on Secretary of State and all that, and that works great for entities that are incorporated. But I'm wondering how many of those unvetted orgs, rather, are unvetted as a result of the fact that they're simply not corporations.
We have all the LLCs are also covered.
Well, an LLC is a limited liability corporation.
Yeah.
But, for example, org ID DeLong is not a corporation in any way, shape, or form.
You don't vet.
I don't vet,
You don't vet.
so I get tossed into the unvetted pile simply because I'm not a corporation.
No, simply because you're not legally registered to do business in a state.
Right, that's correct.
Oh, but I am.
Oh, then you send us the papers and we go and check. We do a third-party validation of that, and then you're vetted. I just said, for the most part, we use Secretary of State, and I said we have other tools to do strange
We can't
companies like
remotely
you.
and automatically vet you, yes.
Yeah, there are lots of business structures like sole proprietorships and whatnot that are not incorporated, and the Secretary of State doesn't deal with them, but they
Right.
have
We
legitimate
do.
fictitious business names and
Right.
all the other stuff.
We deal with
Correct.
all that. Lisa could give you all the tools that they use. I don't use them on a daily basis, so, but yes, we do deal with all the fictitious names registered. They all have to be registered, though, right? If they're not registered with anybody to do business legally in the ARIN region, then they do not vet. I was just giving examples, Owen. Thank you
Okay,
for keeping me honest.
thank you, John.